Part 1 covered the creation of the Crown Point Military Road, built in 1759, that followed a path known as the Indian Road, and how there was a population collapse of the native people in the Northeast 130 years before the construction of the Crown Point Road, resulting in only 10% of the original population surviving. Part 2 created a historical record of the first known recorded document of the Indian Road in an attempt to locate the forgotten path, which is now in ruins on a steep and rocky mountainside. Those ruins on the side of the mountain are where we start for the 12,000-year-old road of Vermont, Part 3. This possible ancient pathway is lined with stonework. A large snakehead-like boulder sits at the beginning of the pathway across the mountainside. This reptile-shaped boulder could be a serpent effigy representing a great horned serpent, a type of mythological freshwater serpent found in lakes and rivers common to many tribes of the eastern United States and Canada. This kind of stonework is not unique to this location, quite the opposite. It is a common feature found along ancient pathways. They are known as ceremonial stone landscapes, a name given by the United South and Eastern tribes, an intertribal organization serving 33 federally recognized tribal nations. These landscapes often contain features such as dry stone walls, rock piles, stone chambers, unusually shaped boulders, split boulders with stone inserted in the split, and boulders propped up off the ground with smaller rocks. They are found along the eastern seaboard from Georgia to Maine, with the Northeast having the majority of these landscapes. Features associated with the ceremonial stone landscapes can be found along this old road, a subject that will be addressed later in this video. For now, let's turn the focus to why this became a road in the first place. This road follows one of the few natural east-west corridors across the Green Mountains of Vermont that connects the Connecticut River Valley that leads to the Atlantic Ocean and Lake Champlain that drain into the St. Lawrence River that also flows into the Atlantic. The natural corridor can be seen here in green, which indicates the lower land elevation. As you can see, both north and south the passage through the Green Mountains is hindered by mountains themselves. Like other ancient roads, the first sign of this natural passageway in use was created by animals. In this case, that is an extinct megafauna. During the construction of a railroad along this corridor in the summer of 1848, workers excavated 11 feet in peat bog and found several bones, a molar, and 2 tusks of a woolly mammoth resting at the bottom of the bog. Recent carbon-14 dating from Dartmouth College of a rib from that mammoth gave results of 12,800 years ago. Vermont looked much different at this time. The Laurentine ice sheet that once covered the land has retreated into what is now Quebec and lined an inland sea that is known as the Champlain Sea. The Champlain Sea was created when the melting ice gave way to the waters of the Atlantic that flowed into the Champlain Basin, which was below sea level at the time due to the weight of the glacials pushing down on it, what geologists call glacial isostatic depression. On the eastern side of this ancient pathway that is today the Connecticut River Valley was a massive glacial lake that formed due to the marine dam made of ice and rock in what today is Rocky Hill, Connecticut. From there, the lake stretched northward to St. Johnsbury area of Vermont. This glacial lake was over 200 miles long and was here from 15,000 years ago until the ice dam broke 12,000 years ago, causing rapid drainage in a few weeks or even a few days. The land between the glacial lake and the inland sea was a tundra, much like what northern Labrador looks like today. Mastodons, giant sloths, giant beavers, stag moose, short-faced bear, caribou, and saber-toothed cats roam the landscape with the Mount Holly mammoth. Belugas, fin and bowhead whales, walruses, seals, and marine shells such as clams are just some of the ocean's life present in the Champlain Sea. The first people that entered this now icy-free land most likely came up the Atlantic Ocean and traveled inland using the waterways as they followed herds of caribou. The earliest known human site on the road is known as Jackson Gore Site, excavated in 2007. There, fluted points of early to middle Paleo-Indian 12,200 to 11,800 years ago were found. The location is on a well-drained vantage point above the natural corridor below. The lithics found at this site came from all across the Northeast. Red chert from Munsungan Lake in Maine, yellow-brown chert from Pennsylvania, showing that people at this time were extremely mobile or had a wide trade network established. This section of Vermont was most likely an established travel route, well before the people left before the hunting site at Jackson Gore. One of the earliest known human settlements in New Hampshire is located in the town of Keene. At the time, a short distance from Glacial Lake Hitchcock. Paleo-Americans from this nearby location might have used the natural corridor for easy access across the Green Mountains to the Inland Sea, which also has lithic site source from far-off location that most likely required some kind of watercraft to reach northern Labrador. It is quite obvious that the Paleo-Americans were capable travelers both across land and water, creating highly skilled lithics from a wide range of source locations, and this natural corridor was an important pathway through the Green Mountains. This area of North America is unique in the fact that, unlike much of the maritime paleo landscapes that now exist under the waves of the Atlantic Ocean, due to the sea levels rising at the end of the last ice age, now free from the weight of the glaciers, the Champlain Basin started to rise, and the seawater was drained out in a process called post-glacial rebound. Many of the Paleo-American sites in this part of Northeast are found along these ancient shorelines, such as these sites along the Champlain Sea. On the other side of the road along the ancient shoreline of Glacial Lake Hitchcock, there is perhaps a different kind of site. The ceremonial stone landscapes in this part of Vermont seem to recognize the ancient shoreline of the glacial lake. On this hill that was once a peninsula, there is a stone row that is easily visible on LiDAR, but hard to see in person. The stone row is covered in vegetation and moss. In certain areas, it is almost completely buried. This stonework doesn't divide property. It's too low to have been used to keep in animals, and the high amount of quartz within is common in ceremonial stone landscapes. Across the Connecticut Valley in what's now New Hampshire, there is another hill that was once an island, and it too has a stone row that contains a high amount of quartz. This row also incorporates bedrock by curving uphill into it. Running across the top of it, and continuing down the slope, ending abruptly above the ancient shoreline. Where the Crown Point Road and Indian Road begins on the western side valley, there is an area where there once is an inlet of the glacial lake. Here, there are stone rows that overlook the now rich soil that has been turned into farmland. The stone rows begin and end on bedrock. This kind of work is what could be classified as a ceremonial stone landscape, It doesn't serve any agricultural needs or divide the land, but it's extremely well built on the bedrock, something a self-sustaining farmer most likely wouldn't take time to create. Not far from the ancient inlet is a longer stone row that is like the one in New Hampshire, begins right at the now-gone shoreline. The stonework travels up the small mountain until it reaches a large boulder that looks towards the valley below. Further inland, there is another inlet a short distance above where the glacial waters were. All along the ancient shoreline, there is stonework that seems to be recognizing where the glacial waters once were. Some of this stonework, such as this possible stone mound that has stone row running over the edge of it, is massive. The stonework continues into the mountains. Following along the road, there are many smaller stone mounds, serpent effigies, standing stones, stone-lined pathways, and chambers with winter solstice alignments. This could possibly be the work of 12,000 years of people using this natural passageway through the mountains until the dispersal of the Abenaki from the area in early to mid-1700s. The vast majority of this work has been credited to the colonial settlers of the mid-1700s and the sheep boom in the early 1800s, due to the myth that this land was never fully inhabited by the Abenaki. Before the population collapse of the indigenous people of the Northeast, the coastline from Maine to the Carolinas was filled with farms, cleared land, and densely populated villages. The French explorer Samuel de Champlain, which Lake Champlain is named after, wrote in 1609 of those fertile fields of maize in the Champlain and Connecticut valleys. The diseases that destroyed the populations along the coastline moved ahead of the settlers in the 1600s as they took over widowed land filled with skeletons of those that passed from the diseases. The first 50 settlements in New England were deserted indigenous villages. Those same diseases worked their way inland long before the settlers traveled up the Connecticut River. By the time the settlers arrived in large numbers in the mid-1700s, there were hardly any indigenous people present after being forced out of the region into Canada. This allowed the myth of the area of the Northeast was merely a hunting land for native people, which lasted until the 1980s, and it wasn't until 2012 that the state of Vermont recognized the Abenaki that have been here since the end of the Ice Age. Could it be possible that the ancestors of the indigenous people of the Northeast are responsible for creating the stonework that lines this ancient pathway? With the population collapse followed by being forced out of these lands, there were no native people here to say what they did and didn't create. The lack of cultural knowledge has allowed for possible falsehoods about these landscapes to be considered final truths. Until the request for recognition of ceremonial stone landscapes by the 33 tribes of the United South and Eastern Tribes is taken seriously, and these ancient landscapes are properly studied, we may never truly know what secrets and beauty have been lost in time.